April, thank you so much. Can I use the privilege to go first and ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you. Really amazing presentation and just so many things for us all to think about.
Yeah.
I have noticed that through your presentation, you really insist on the importance of the language.
Mm-hmm.
And we spoke about it also during our visit in summer. So
Mm-hmm.
could you please clarify a little bit more? Why is that, and why this the connection to the environment, the connection to the land, is so much linked to the connection to the language?
Yes, thank you for that question, Elena. For what I've been taught, and I think there's multiple ways to look at this. First of all, I think there's this sense, even when I might be walking through the woods and part of the territory up here in rural Upper Peninsula, I might be looking and walking through a forest, and I think about the forest sentiment of, because a lot of it's newer forest, right? That's because it was logging, but there's also old growth forests. But I think about, do they long to hear the language? Do they long to hear those renewal songs, those ceremonies in the language? Who are we to think that they're not capable of, in their own way, hearing and understanding those languages? So I think about that. And so I often actually in the woods will go to sing, not just by myself, but with others as well, to sing those songs, so that those trees and those beings of the forest have that opportunity. So that's one thing. But the other thing I think is notable is that the worldviews for Ojibwa people are so embedded in the language that there's a loss in translation when you're trying to teach worldviews in English. And so when I talked about the expansive and fluidity of nationhood as one word example, there are other examples, but there's just a loss in translation. So learning the language as a skill and a regular practice, as a means to be able to be engaged in ritual, to do and participate in ceremonies and regeneration of renewal, having these renewal ceremonies, it's because it informs that worldview and underscores that interconnectivity. I, again, can say unborn generations in English, but that Ojibwa word for great-grandparent and great-grandchild, there is an understanding, and this is a shift that I have to ask everyone to make. It is knowing thyself, both in the past and knowing thyself in the future. So having that deep relationship with language learning, I ask everybody, if you're going to live here in, what is known as Marquette or Gitchiname Benigisis, please learn some of the language, just a little bit, so you can greet the area, you can greet the lake, you can greet the forest, you can greet the beings of this territory. They deserve that.
Well, Nick Watch, you taught me at least a couple of words
Yeah.
and for those of us who would love to learn Ojibwa but really don't know where to start, could you perhaps point us to some resources?
Oh my goodness! So there are a number of resources. I think that might be a sheet that I need to share with you, and we can share on the website. So they're obviously within the universities, throughout Michigan, actually. And other places as well. There are ways to learn the language through different teachers online. And there are also community efforts to teach language. And so I think that would be something, Elena, that I would want to be careful in making sure I give specific information. So allow me a little bit of time to put something together for you, and we can share it on the website.
Thank you very much. We have many questions coming through the Q&A. So a question from Kayleen. Do you have any book recommendations for those of us looking to further our education on Native studies?
Absolutely. I think one that would be very aligned with this conversation would be Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. That's a very notable text. Leanne Simpson, As We Have Always Done, or Dancing on Turtle's Back. Leanne Simpson is, would be exceptional. I think Native Studies as a whole, that's a tough one because there's so many nuances with Native Studies, but parallel to this conversation, those are three titles that could come to the top of my head right away. So hopefully those are helpful.
Thank you. The next question is actually very close. I would read it, but I think you partially already answered it. I would love to read the stories you mentioned. Is there a book or recording I can read and hear?
Yes. So I will say the Minnesota Historical Society has, because of COVID, we have to navigate this new world. And the Minnesota Historical Society has reached out to some Ojibwa culture bearers. So for the last couple of years, they've actually been doing storytelling evenings with some of the culture bearers, and they have recordings that are available. They're a little bit harder to find. And there's also the potential problem of not finding somebody who really has that culture intact and is part of their way of living, right? So I would recommend looking up I want to say it's called Indigenous Storytellers through the Minnesota Historical Society. They have some great storytellers shared on their website.
Thank you. The next question is from Mary. What are school-age children in the Upper Peninsula learning about connectivity between ourselves and elements of nature?
Wow, that's a great question, and one I'm not savvy enough to know. I'm not working within the K-12 systems to know what they might be learning, but I hope that there would be something about just a relationship to land and territory, because we have so much rurality. There's so many rural areas, but I can't speak to that eloquently, so I apologize. And maybe there's some other colleagues of mine who are on the call who could help with that a little more distinctly.
April, quick question from myself also. So I know that you have been involved quite a lot in teacher training programs. So even if we don't know exactly what is going on in the classroom, but do you have any thoughts about perhaps how teachers working on this question?
So one of this is going to sound probably whatever, but we have classes that help with teachers for teachers to do that. Dr. Reinhardt, who I mentioned earlier, was really the spark plug for starting the Decolonizing Diet Project, teaches a course entitled Native American Inclusion in the Classroom. And this is part of a series of classes that it's a certification that we provide that really help teachers enhance their abilities to expand what they're doing in the classroom. And that is not only to meet the standards required for the state of Michigan and national standards, but it's also tribal standards and Indigenous standards. We have our standards too. And so he discusses those in that class. And we did receive a grant a number of years ago to offer a graduate class. We had, I want to say 13 or 14 states represented. People traveled from all over the United States to come and take that class as part of a National Science Foundation grant that we earned. And it was pretty fast and furious over the week, but Marty taught the class and he still teaches it. And it's always online. So regardless of where you're at, if you can make the commitment to be joining him, he offers some great things online. And especially when we learn that teachers want to know more, we recognize that you are on the front lines and you have so many attention, eyes and ears, at your attention. And so that you're in the amazing position to help us get some of these conversations out there. So
April, and do you teach this, do you and Marty and your colleagues, do you teach this course kind of based on subject or grade? would it be the same cohort, let's say, for university faculty and K-12 faculty? Like what are the best ways kind of to participate in this program?
Yes, it is. It is not designated. That particular one was highlighting STEM, but was open to everybody. It is. We try to make it as broad as possible, recognizing that a college faculty may want it just as much as a fourth grade teacher may want it. And so we try to keep it as broad as possible. And I think really it's what you're also bringing to the table, and Marty works with folks individually to kind of help hone in specific skills based on where you're at in the classroom as a teacher.
Thank you.
Yes.
The next question is from Nancy. What are some Indigenous organizations or groups we can partner with for climate justice work here in West Michigan?
Wow, great question. You know, I would start with the tribes down that way. I would start with tribal nations, but then I would also think, because some of the groups who are in doing this work, like there was the Indigenous Food Summit held not too long ago, that's made up of a number of groups across, you know, the central United States, and even people from Canada came. So I think what I would invite you to do is start with the tribal nations who are doing some of the work, and then building out from there. That might be another thing I might ask for a little bit of time on, and I'll make a sheet up for that. I got to start taking notes. Make a sheet up for that to discuss some of those organizations, because I think there's some very specific things happening in the lower peninsula on the west end, but I would want to make sure I have names and numbers and stuff like that so people go to the right places. But I think always starting with tribal nations is very, very important, because they are sovereign entities and they themselves have a lot of great work going on at each tribe.
Thank you so much for this. There is also an observation coming from Steve. Western or American culture has difficulty looking forward one generation in our regard for future. So I was wondering if you would comment.
Absolutely. I think that is something that, you know, it is one of those personal paradigm shifts that we have to try to endeavor to. I think it's, for some of us who have been part of this conversation, it's something that comes gradually, but it's something that's kind of always weighing a little bit on my mind, both as a positive and a negative, right? Hopefulness as well as worriness. But you're right. I think in mainstream society, there's an immediacy of what's the next shiny toy. And I will say the next shiny toy always fades, because there's a next shiny toy after that. So seeing and understanding consequences so closely, I think there's a lot of things at play that are distractions, I'm using air quotes, to keep us from thinking deeply, thinking in stillness, so that we have the capability to move our minds to be thinking ahead. And I think that's another reason I'll mention the language is, do we have words in the English language? And maybe I'm not as familiar with those, that put us in place of our great grandparents' time and our great grandchild's time simultaneously. I can't think of one, but the fact that the Ojibwa do, that's, you know, to their, it helps them position them to be thinking that way all the time. But yes, we have work to do. And I think the more we can balance ourselves, being mindful of the distractions, and, you know, keeping that our thought centered and keeping the center of the earth. Remember, I had the 5 outcomes in the circle, and that the center of it was the earth. That's one of the ways I think is a starting point for helping us to expand our mind to be thinking in those ways. Thank you for that very important question.
Thank you, Professor Lindala. So the next question is actually exactly about this circle of 5 outcomes with the Earth in the center. And the question from Nancy is, what are some strategies that you see that could help humans to put the Earth at the center of the circle?
Wow, that is a great question as well. And I think This is one of the reasons I opened with the phrase, Nancy, when I had the picture of Lake Superior, and I said, this is not a resource. Water is a source. It is the source. It is the source of life. We don't talk about water in that way. We don't have conversations about water in that way. Another really recommendation for a book is Louise Erdrich's Books and Islands in Ojibwe country. And in that book, she talks about the 4 women protectors who protect the different types of water. Water preceded us in life, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have water in our bodies. We are made up of water. And so I think just having the practice of and introducing ourselves to more and more Indigenous voices who are repeating very similar things over and over again, it's about re-engaging with, again, the conversation in saying water is a source. And water is just one example, right? That's just one example. It's a primary example, but it's one example. To be reframing those conversations to say, this isn't a resource, it's the source. And there are people on our planet who have commercialized it and commodified it and have prevented other people from having it. In our original instructions, that would never have been the case. And so it goes back to the whole idea of the concept of, or connection to land as property. It just wasn't, and in our ways of thinking and our ways of teaching isn't the case. I don't know if I answered your question, Nancy, but it is one I'll probably be thinking about for a while, because I think ultimately that's what we all want to know, is how do we make that shift happen? And we in Native Studies, I believe, are a force for trying to do that for our students.
We have a few more of these how very big questions, and I hope that can at least start the conversation about how we can use the Indigenous wisdom in finding inspiration and finding source for those solutions. So one of our guests made an observation about how the Western culture really is just had a hard time even looking beyond one generation. And the question is, how can we improve our ability to have greater regards for our future generation in Western culture? How we can bring those Indigenous philosophies and practices?
Yes. I think one of the ways is familiarizing yourself with Native voices who are doing that. I'm one example for 1 hour, and so I think, but some of the individuals I've listed, as far as John Mohawk talking about unborn generations, there's an anthology of his letters, speeches, presentations, essays in a book edited by Barrio, I forget his first name, but the book title is Thinking in Indian. And the John Mohawk is his name. He's passed on now. I think other ways, I think I would just say that's educating yourself by centering Indigenous voices to teach us in society how to do that. Because those how questions are not a one and done. This is an ongoing process, and it takes time, right? So I'm gifted with 1 hour of your time today. I'm lucky to be gifted 16 weeks of time with my students. But yes, that is something that I would hope that as one voice and one person offering this is to don't let go of just this one time we have a conversation today. Continue on that idea of renewal through your own research and your own reading. And, maybe it's about, if you're nowhere near another Indigenous community, simply having maybe book club discussions or film discussions. Boy, people love films, talking about films. And so those are the kinds of things that I would say generate to start having in order to help you with both a vocabulary to build from that helps you think expansively in that way, but also just having those messages reiterated from multiple Indigenous voices, I think will be extremely useful.
Yeah, this is such a great suggestion. And so what is your advice for non-Indigenous, let's say, partners who really want to engage with Indigenous communities and learn more, and also how to adopt those practices really with intentionality, that are honoring and authentic and intentional. So what are really those ways of, coming together?
Yeah, such a great question, Alina. And I think one of the things is like what you're doing here is opening the door for having a conversation with multiple people. But also when you and I met, and with your students up here, we were able to just go for a walk and we were able to just talk. This is not easy, and it's not like a quick fix, right? Investing in Indigenous voices means respecting Indigenous people on Indigenous terms. And that takes time. And that also means shifting out of this sort of understanding of Western educational practices. So the idea of slowing down and respect, I give the example of going to meet an elder at a nearby reservation community, and we sat and we had tea for a while. I don't know how long. And I just had one question, but I brought tobacco as a medicine that's honored in this territory as a gift, and I brought a bag of wild rice as a gift because I was requesting something. There's a reciprocal exchange happening here. I don't have the knowledge, this person did, but I've had the ability to pass tobacco as a means of respecting his way of, giving an answer or sharing an answer, and then a gift of wild rice. So that's one thing I would say as a simple practice is engagement. But I would also say answers don't necessarily come face value. They might come through a story, and you might not get that story that day or the next week or the next couple of months, but allow that story to percolate within you. Take time to think about it. I think one of the best times that I remember is just sitting around a fire with my friends and colleagues in silence and just thinking deeply. That practice of thinking and being in silence, and understanding all of these things and slowing down. That means silence from our phones, silence from other voices, silence from, I would even say, fast food, right? So what does that mean for us? And so the idea of a fast is a ceremonial one, but I would also say being in academia for as long as I have, I would also say research is ceremony, as Sean Wilson suggests in his title of his book, that research and the practice of deep thinking and deep contemplation is also in and of itself its own ceremony. And anybody and everybody can do that, but it does take time and practice. I hope those were helpful beginning steps, but certainly ongoing conversations. So for me, Alina, you and I have established a conversation. I don't see that ending anytime soon. And that's one way, right? Like that's one way to do that, is to keep those conversations going.
Well, thank you so much. I have many questions in the queue, so I apologize to those of you if I am skipping occasionally some of those questions. If they are close, I'm trying to aggregate them in somewhat similar ideas. And so I just want to read the question from Lynn, who is saying, thank you so much for sharing this information and beautiful pictures. What was your favorite part of your cooking experience? And I also want to learn about your cooking experience.
Oh my gosh, the cooking experience, the diet project. I think it's sharing it with others, because we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, and then we just had to keep practicing and keep practicing. And one of the things, I don't know if this was my favorite, but was certainly memorable, was we convinced our university president at the time to create a meal for our board of trustees. And I think he was a little nervous, but we worked with our amazing culinary arts staff. And so all of our dishes, which we thought were shining stars, our culinary arts faculty made them into shooting stars, even more brilliant. And so we were able to share a fully Indigenous, Great Lakes Indigenous meal, all Indigenous ingredients with our board of trustees as a means of showing, as practice, you know, our connectivity to the earth as a food source, right? And so that's probably the most memorable, but I think just being able to share and teach other people continually, I'm still doing it 10 years later, you know, being asked to present at different places, as is many of us as who are research subjects. And I love the concept of it. I love the practice of it. And I'm going to tell you what, you just feel good eating the food. You feel good eating the food. Thank you for that.